Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the MedTech podcast. You join me, your host Karandeep Badwell, and in today's episode I'll be hosting Simon Curtis, who is the director of Vado MedTech, a specialist MedTech recruitment consultancy. Simon has been operating in this sector for over 17 years, and on this episode he shares with us what the future of recruitment will look like and the concept of a hybrid workforce consisting of freelancers combined with permanent staff, and the ever-going changes happening with companies right now in terms of how they go about recruiting for new staff. Hello Simon, how are you?
Good, thanks. You, Karandeep?
I'm very well, thank you. So recruitment, Simon, how did you get into it?
I've been in recruitment now for around about 17 years. So after leaving college, I worked abroad for a couple of years in Spain, Ibiza to be more specific, come back, started a beautiful career as a telephone engineer, which was kind of a family trait for pretty much all the males in my family. And I decided that it probably wasn't the career for me. It was a lacking a few elements that would give me fulfillment. So I had a friend that worked in recruitment. I knew he really enjoyed it. I knew he made good money as he was working in the city, interestingly placing communications engineers. So I started to look into it and made a few applications. I got rejected from pretty much every application I made because I didn't have a degree. And at the time, if you were looking for an opportunity in recruitment, almost everything stipulated that you had a degree. And I think that was to prove one of the qualities people tend to look for in recruiters is resilience, being able to stay at something with a view to like a bigger outcome, regardless of how many times you fail. So I think looking at a degree for a lot of employers is quite an easy measure of that. If you can gauge it against the results. So yeah, I got pretty much rejected from everywhere in the city, with the exception of a firm called Huxley Associates, or S3. So S3 are now kind of like Michael Page type size firm. And I made an application to them, went to a couple of interviews, and basically up sticks from where I was living at the time and moved my career to Reading. I nearly turned around the first time I came here. I think I just came into the wrong end of town. But yeah, I ended up moving here on New Year's Eve. It was 2003. I literally moved to Reading on New Year's Eve into an apartment and started work on, I think it was like the 3rd or 4th of Jan in this new job as a trainee. Did really well my first year. Then, so I was working at engineering desks. So I was placing quality engineers, predominantly into the automotive sector. So to companies like BMW, a lot of tier 1 suppliers, etc. Then I built up a team. S3 then floated on the market, and it lost its entrepreneurial vibe, and a lot of the individuals that were quite fundamental in building up that business, both locally in the office that I was in and further afield, kind of left to do their own thing. Some of them have done quite well off the float, and they wanted to reinvest that in their own business. So I left after, I think it was about 4.5 years. We went to set up another firm called Austin Fraser, which at the time there's 4 of us. We grew it to around about 120 people across 3 different countries, and ended up running that firm as MD. And then I decided I wanted to take some time out with my family. So I took around about a year and a bit out, did a little bit of consulting work in the industry, both in technology and directly with other recruitment firms around their operating models. And then I decided I wanted to focus on setting up my own venture, but doing that in partnership with someone else so that we could scale the business faster. And we set up Vado MedTech, which is a super niche business supporting the recruitment of reg and quality professionals around the EU, but predominantly in the US. At the moment, that's something that changed last year. So we focus on that area, and it was kind of what led me there was it's kind of where I cut my teeth. Is I guess what started Vado was where I actually cut my teeth with Huxley Associates on a quality engineering desk. starting out in automotive that then led me into medical technology. So we specialised in that field. And at the moment we work on assignments. It would be anything from like a senior reg affairs specialist through to a VP of reg affairs, and we'll place anyone from like a one-off individual with a startup through to helping a company scale. I think the biggest project we worked on was probably making around about 70 hires across the space of about 9 months across multiple US and EU offices. So it's a pretty interesting place to be at the moment, and we're seeing quite a lot change. But yeah, it was let's just say it was a happy accident.
Yeah, so interesting. You've mentioned the US, Austin, Texas. What's brought the medtech boom in that area?
I wouldn't say it's booming at the moment. Texas is a really interesting place where it's quite attractive as a company to set up there from a taxation point of view. There, it's very light on taxation, which can encourage businesses to start up there. You've kind of got like the 4 main areas. So we predominantly place people across Texas and Florida. We source people from what the wider states, and we'll place people across the wider states. But they're the 2 areas that we focus on from a client point of view. Austin has quite a heavy base of orthopedic firms that are manufacturing surgical tools. But one of the interesting things that's starting to develop, particularly in and around Austin, is because there's very much like a tech scene boom. So Facebook are there, Dell have got their HQ there. There's a huge tech skill set from a software development point of view. So Apple have got some of their healthcare team. I think Google have too. Is that you are seeing some of the more SAMD type businesses pop up there, and a lot more of the advanced technology. So there's a few firms involved in brain implants there, neurostimulation, some of the more complex skills, if you want, that require us like a software, hardware mindset, or that kind of connected element. But it's an interesting thing to see evolve. There's a good startup scene there and across Texas in general, and also there's a lot of people migrating to Texas as well. I think people are reflecting on their lives during a period of lockdown and think about where else they want to take their career and skills, both in tech, so in software, but also it seems in medical devices. Like Texas is a good place to be at the moment.
Okay. So what do you think is the future of the workforce now? Because with the pandemic, before that, there were some companies, they were sort of adamant that people had to come to an office. They were against remote work. They didn't realize that it does actually work in practice. How do you now see the future?
It's quite a big question. And I think you've got to look beyond the pandemic. I think the pandemic really has accelerated some decisions that were very much sat in the background anyway. You can, in the way the world is connected now, you can literally set up a business from your bedroom and become a global business overnight. So by global, I don't mean that you've got a presence in multiple countries, but that you can deal with multiple countries. The internet has enabled that. There's various different products that have enabled that. But the one thing I guess the pandemic has proven is that in certain functions, and it is certain functions, so you take things like anything in the lab, anything that's physical, so like quality inspection, there's certain quality engineering functions. Audits obviously a bit more challenging remotely, and there'll be some test cases, I guess, around that. But the reality is the pandemic proved that people can work effectively from home. So there's been that one element operating, which is there's been a giant global case study, if you want, on proving that this can actually work. But then in conjunction with that, there's been more of the human element. And the human element is people realizing that they don't have to spend an hour and a half in a car or a train or a bus making a commute to go and sit in an office or sit in a building to perform a certain task, to then take an hour and a half to commute back. And people have started to look at their lives and value time more. And they've also come to the conclusion that they can operate quite effectively from home. Now, it's still a little bit up in the air as to, do people want to work remotely all of the time? Or do people want to be in the office? But the one thing that's evident is there's more power now with the employee. And that's not that the employee is necessarily going to start making decisions around the policy of employment, working conditions, etc. But they will definitely have more of a voice. They feel more, because they feel more empowered, that they don't have to have any necessarily like physical assets to support them in performing their duties. That gives them more confidence. Therefore, they're likely to request certain working conditions. And the commonality of those requests is people want an element of flexibility. They also they know that they need to be part of the office, and that kind of company culture in general. But also it's opened people's eyes that, okay, well, if I can do this remotely, for some individuals, it's been a case, well, maybe I could do this as a freelancer and support more than just my company. So people have made the shift to effectively almost outsourcing their skills and knowledge to multiple companies. And you kind of made that shift before the pandemic, but I guess you're a good example of that. And really what we're seeing happen is one of a few things. So the remote thing, well, 100% is here to stay. It's really just a case of how a company decides to operate that, because there's multiple ways to approach it. Effectively, you can have, primary option is to have remote in country. So they're still, from an employment point of view, their contracts are still going to operate within the same company. So within the same country, their payroll is still going to operate within the same country. Therefore, they're not going to have any particular challenges or issues around that. There's no huge changes to make, but they can now leverage talent way beyond their physical location, their physical office location before, where their staff were based. So now the whole country is their playground, or the whole state is their playground if it's in the state, from a talent point of view. Then you've got the braver aspect of remote out of country, which, if you're forward thinking enough and you've got the right support, whether in-house or out of house, as a partner, to look at payrolls and contracting solutions, HR policies for having out of country employees. Again, the only real limitation is the clock and where in the world you might be based in order to work effectively with the rest of your team members. But in that particular instance, if you're brave enough to make that move, effectively the world becomes your playground from a talent point of view. And then you've got this like freelancer element coming into play as well. And so for me, the one observation is if you're planning to scale up a team, or if you're looking to bring in skills that are in demand, and reg skills in particular, so let's just focus on that. Like reg skills in particular are very much in demand at the moment. The MDRs had a huge impact on that and pulled a lot of resources into some of the bigger firms who have got bigger challenges to meet. It's also impacted the kind of the startup world. But what's become really obvious is, well, why do I necessarily need to invest someone 5 days a week to perform this particular task or to have this particular expertise? What if I could have a hybrid or more blended solution to help me meet my goals as a business or as an organization? Because it's not, historically, for like decades, companies have employed consultancies to help them meet particular milestones, or to work on commercialization, to work on clinical trials, to work on new product development, to help them meet those more complex milestones. But now there's this like global talent workforce available. It can, if you're brave enough to make those moves, it can open your eyes to go, okay, well, actually, let's look at the core functions that I need on site, that I need day to day, and the skills and knowledge that I need to get our business from this journey from A to B, whatever C, D, and E after that. But let's just focus on that one aspect. How do I get from A to B? What skills do I need? Now, do I need those people full time? If I don't, what does that look like? Am I looking in country? Can I look out of country? Is it more effective to look out of country? I.e., if I went to a country where resources cheaper, or it's cheaper for me to employ people, but the skills base still exists there, and there's no time or language barriers necessarily in that being successful, would that be a good investment to make to offshore some of the skills that I require as a business to help me get to that journey? And also, if there's something that's super niche sat within my list of skills that I require to kick my business on, is that something that I could plug a freelancer in for? And not just to help me to get to A to B, but also to help transfer some of that knowledge to the existing team members, the full-time team members I have within my team. Because the one thing that stands out in my time as a recruiter is that a job specification it's a very strange document in that effectively it's an internal document. It should be an internal facing document to focus on the roles and responsibilities of that individuals and the skills that you need to perform those. But at some point, don't know when, it would definitely happen way before I got into recruitment, that also became the job advert. But when we're consistently investigating with an organization, a hiring manager, exactly what they need to kick their business on, quite often you can strip out almost 60% of that job specification, because there's some aspects they're willing for the individual to learn, to develop on, that they just don't expect because they know it doesn't exist because it's too new. And you're left with the 40% that they actually really need right here, right now. And if you were able to disseminate that and think more freely about how you bring in resources to support your business, and not just focusing on one person to perform all of those tasks or to have all of that knowledge, 100% it's going to help speed up some of the decisions you're able to make as a business, and also possibly how fast you can get your product to market if it's a pre-market or commercialization exercise. And we are seeing that more and more now, particularly with like interim appointments of some very senior people to help accelerate that journey. But the best journeys they can go through are also ones where they can transfer that knowledge to. So we're looking at that as like hybrid teams. I think there's lots of different terms that are popping up, but this isn't about remote working. This is about, how do I gain resources that I need as a business to move myself from A to B? And now that I don't have to focus in this bubble anymore of, well, hey, I'm in Birmingham as an example. Yeah, my office is in Birmingham. I'm running this business, and I have to get everyone has to come to the office to perform their job because they need to be visible and they need to be present. That limit doesn't exist anymore. It does, and it possibly always will with some people, because there is a personal preference here. But for those who are open-minded and brave enough to look at that remote workforce option and that more blended solution, the decisions that really should be made is, well, I'm here as a business at the moment. This is where I need to get to. This is the budget that I have to get from A to B, and look at how I spend that budget to acquire the skills and expertise that I need. And maybe that's not just one person anymore. Maybe that might be 5 people, but those 5 people I'm utilizing at different times. I might take on a freelancer who, yes, they will cost more, but if they can perform that task 3 times faster than a permanent person who's going to require, they're going to have a learning curve with developing that. Is that a good investment to make? 100%. Maybe I can bring in some part-time resource there. And there are, believe it or not, quite a lot of people out there who would look to take on less hours. And therefore you can plug in that expertise again, at a lower cost. And really just then consider, okay, who are the full-time people I need? Where should I make that investment in having someone making a commitment to the business 5 days a week, 40 hours, whatever the rules are, wherever you are in the world. But yeah, 100%, this hybrid solution is here to stay. And I think for me, one of the more interesting observations is people have been talking for like decades that recruitment as an industry and recruiters is eventually you're going to get phased out. You'll probably get phased out by technology. I've never seen that happen. In fact, we're busier now than I can ever recall in a 17-year career. But what is happening is good recruiters will never go away. But the interesting aspect is there's now a lot more power sat with the employee or potential employee. And the aspect of assessing where you want to take your skills, you take your knowledge, is also in tune and more balanced with some life decisions that you're making at the same time. I remember pre-pandemic, the number one topic coming from anyone, whether they're in QA, whether they're in reg, a particular role that could afford to work remotely, everyone was asking the same thing, like, I want to work for a company that will offer remote working. And there was probably only, 10 companies that I could think of off the top of my head that would do that that was their model, and they were set up to do that. Whereas now everyone's doing that, which has kind of like leveled the field a little bit. It also means you can pick up talent from different places. But that empowerment of the employee is now leading to more informed choices of how they want to work, when they want to work, the hours. And we're nowhere near the end of this journey at the moment. It's only really just evolving, because if you have a work from anywhere, anytime type policy, there are going to be instances which people have to acknowledge to maybe like tweak and change that policy to make sure that that business can remain safe in the way that they continue to operate and that they're functioning effectively. But yeah, it's not, recruitment hasn't actually really changed that much. There's more technology at play, but the one aspect that's definitely changed is the sheer amount of power sat with the employee and the choices that gives them. And most people want to work with firms who are like-minded or open-minded about the subject. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so if we look at it from a different perspective, would you say that job security is at risk? Because like you said, the example of Birmingham, if you lived half an hour from an office, you were the only person with that skill set within the commutable distance of the office. Now people are having sort of these hybrid workforces as you describe them. Would you say that there's a certain amount of people out there that are now going to lose that job security that they previously had?
I don't believe so, because I'm speaking on behalf of the medical technology industry. Of course, there are going to be industries out there that will be impacted and already have been impacted. I can only go back to the start of my career, when one of the things that actually drove me into medical technology was the downturn in the automotive sector in the UK at the time. MG Rover had shut down, Vauxhall was ramping down, Ford were ramping down. It had an impact on all of the first tier suppliers. And the driving factor behind everything was cost. And it was, how do we reduce the cost of our components? How do we reduce the cost of our staff? And a lot of plants were set up in Eastern Europe and things like this. But what they actually quite quickly realized, well, I say quite quickly, probably after 5 to 6 years, is if that cost had a direct impact on the quality and safety of those products, then was that decision actually worth it? And the one common factor with medical devices, medical technology, IVD, is quality has never been compromised on the basis of cost, because it puts the patient at risk. And I think you can take some comfort in that. I don't believe any organization is out there at the moment going, hey, how can we source reg people or medical writers or validation people? How can we source them like cheaper or more? That's never an agenda item. It's always, how do we source the right skills for our business, and how do we sort them at a cost that's relative to like the market? But that offshoring element or outsourcing element isn't necessarily something that's commonplace within medical devices, and I don't believe it will. The unknown aspect from here is how that globalization of the workforce will impact salaries, because just because if I'm in another country performing the same function for you as an individual, I'll take a good example. So we took an assignment off a client last week who's based in California. California is notoriously expensive, and it's the first time that this particular client has looked at building up resources outside of their offices in San Francisco. And but we're not talking one people, we're talking a whole bundle of people. And one of the topics that came up was salary. Salaries in San Francisco, in California, are really high, because the cost of living, taxation is higher in comparison to the rest of the other states. So one of the topics that came up was, well, how are you approaching salary on this? Because in this particular instance, you've got the option of appointing someone in San Francisco versus somewhere anywhere else in the States. Is how would you approach like advertising the salary on that particular position? And effectively, they've come up with like a national average salary that they'd be prepared to invest in, but then they've got like a premium for someone who's on site in San Francisco. Now, I think that's the right decision to make now. I think the interesting thing to watch will be how this impacts the employer long term when making these types of decisions. Because if you're merely factoring for cost of living, that's going to be quite a complex model to continue to accommodate if you are ever looking at those out of country solutions. And if that's the only measure you make, which is, okay, well, the salaries are relative to taxation or cost of living, because if the empowerment of the employee continues, then again, I'd imagine there's going to be a tipping point where someone's really considering their value to an organization. And if just because of where I live, I get paid exponentially less than a person who's performing exactly the same job in a different part of the world, then it's probably either going to affect my longevity of that organization, or it might affect my mobility, and I might look to move to that particular location so that I can earn more money. And you've seen that happen historically, like pre-pandemic. You jumped on a commuter train from Birmingham to London, it'd be jam-packed. And people will pay a premium to sit on that train to go to London. They'd pay their 14 grand for a ticket per year to go and earn 25 or 30 grand more in the city. But they were sacrificing 3-4 hours of their day in order to take that. People aren't necessarily willing to make those like time-based sacrifices anymore. So I think that's the one aspect to watch, is how this global mobility of workforce talent, it's going to give employers more choices. 100%. It's going to give them more choices as to how and where they can bring on the talent they need to kick their business forwards. It's going to impact the amount of people that are prepared to go into freelancing, because if they're working from home full time and that's what they enjoy, and they feel like they can do that, and they have more comfort, that they're not reliant on other people in order to perform their jobs, that's going to empower more people to go into freelancing. And I think you'll see more of that, and you'll see more individuals. And when I say freelancing, by the way, I'm talking about someone supporting more than one employer. So contractor is someone that's on the site 5 days a week for 3 months and then goes on to another employer. But freelancing to me is someone that's supporting multiple companies or multiple organizations meet their objectives by distributing their skills and knowledge. But that's going to be the interesting one to watch. And I think being in like a strategic HR function, particularly for some of the larger businesses at the moment, it must be a massive challenge, an absolute gigantic challenge. because outside of investing in your employees, developing their skills, fundamentally their happiness and contentment, fulfillment at work is what, and their alignment with their mission is what keeps them there and what keeps them focused on being productive. And if someone's looking across the bow at the moment and seeing that, okay, well, this other firm over here is they've got this work from home policy or this work from anywhere policy, or they're paying people this amount of money, regardless of where they live, that's going to really shake up the scene a little bit. So for me, that's one to watch. But this is far from over. Or, as I said, realistically, all the pandemic did was just prove a point that the working remotely thing works. We're still now, I imagine, on probably like a 4 to 5 year journey of seeing how this impacts employment going into the future. But the one thing that's not going away at the moment is the demand for talent is there. And that's both with firms who are now more confident coming out of the pandemic and are making decisions, but it's also medical devices hasn't really been affected too much. In fact, there are some areas, obviously, like stuff like diagnostics, remote surgery via robotics. All of these areas will be in high growth because there's a lot of investment going into that space, and talent is still very much in demand. When you've got high demand, low supply, there's obviously numerous moves you're going to have to make to ensure that you're securing the people you need ongoing, whether that's being more open-minded about where you employ people, whether it's how much money you're prepared to put behind it from a salary point of view, or whether it's in how many freelancers you want to engage because you can't necessarily get the permanent staff that you need.
Okay. So Simon, to wrap up, if there is a candidate listening to this or somebody who's out on the market, what single piece of advice would you leave them with?
Your career, regardless of what point that you're at, so whether you're making your first move out of uni or you've been in the industry 15 to 20 years, your career outside of getting married, having kids, buying a house is probably one of the biggest decisions that impacts your life in general. And it also impacts all of those other factors. If you're considering making a move, first things first, write down what it is, what you want from your next move. So what does fulfillment look like to you? And don't just focus on the obvious things like job title and salary, which people get caught up on, but focus on what you actually want from the employer. Make a list of those things so that as you begin to start going through that exercise of exploring your options on the market, you've got some hard documentation to go back to midway through that journey when you receive a job offer to sanity check some of your choices around. Because going on that journey as a potential new employee for a company, regardless of how practical you may see it to be or may perceive it to be, it actually becomes quite an emotional one as well, because people get bought into a company's mission, vision, the people, and it can become a more emotionally driven decision. So having that kind of hard place, that kind of facts, if you want, the figures to go back to, as long as they're realistic and you're not like shooting for the moon salary wise, that should be your hard and fast criteria to go back to make sure that the decision you're making is right for you and you're being led as much by your heart as well as your head. The second piece of advice would be, if you are going out to use a recruiter, find out what they're going to do for you. Any recruiter that's worth their salt would most likely be able to create a job opportunity for you. So at the moment, probably somewhere around about 60% of the people we place per month aren't placed in a particular vacancy. They're placed with an organization who we know that they would add value to, and an opportunity is created for them. Not every company can do that. However, in areas like, particularly in reg, some of the skills and knowledge is so much in demand that a company can see the value in employing that type of individual. But if you're going out to that job market, don't just go and flick the button on LinkedIn and wait for the phone to ring, and because literally you'll flick the button and you'll get 60 messages all of a very similar flavor on day one, and then probably get frightened and flick it back off. don't just focus on the job adverts that are out there. Find someone who can give you an insight into what's going on in the market to help you make the right decisions. You don't have to work with that person to the point of you placing them, but at least one of the most beautiful things about what we do is a lot of all of the work that we do for the candidate is effectively free. There's no charge associated with that. And it's cool to see people go through their decisions in their careers and see their progression. I'm working with people now that I worked with at the start of my career. But be careful who you go to, because some recruiters will be enablers for your career, and you'll be able to suss out who that is. You'll be able to tell by what they know about the market, what they know about your CV, beyond like the keywords, etc. That's the thing that everyone thinks about recruitment. It's like keyword matching. It's not at all. You can get a computer to do keyword matching. It's a human to human role, and it fundamentally is focused on like relationships, industry knowledge, etc. But working with the right recruiter can open up doors that might otherwise be closed, because if you're only looking at ads that are out on the job market, they're the same ads that everyone else is looking at. And if there's a senior role with a real punchy salary, guess what? It's probably going to get a lot more applicants than the one with a real average salary. Well, I don't know, like if they got super perks or ends up being with Google or Apple, you can probably form a queue. But working with a good recruiter should be able to open doors, and you should be selective as to who you work with, because there's a huge difference between someone who can actually consult with you about your career and someone who's just sifting CVs off to vacancies, and you're one of many. So find someone that you trust, find someone that you're prepared to work with, and talk to them about where you want to take your career. Take it away from the vacancy, take it away from the money, and just focus on where you want to go, because that's what ultimately your decisions are based on. Your decisions aren't based on, do my skills match the criteria on this job specification? No, it's, do I connect with what the company's doing? How does this enable me as an individual? Can I develop with this company? Will I learn from this person? It's all the softer stuff. Yeah, typically when we go on job searches, you focus on that hard criteria that's in front of you on a job spec, and you can be misled by that. So work with a good recruiter, make a good list, and make that list reasonable. Maybe do the two in conjunction with each other.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time, Simon. Is there anything else you want to add to that? And if somebody is out there looking for a role, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn's like the forum, I think. Still pretty much, you're welcome to give me a call. My number's on my LinkedIn address. But yeah, LinkedIn's the kind of the place that everything sort of tends to get channeled in through. You're welcome to get in touch with me anytime. Apart from that, I think, like, from my point of view, just say, like, thanks for what you're doing. We've obviously been in contact for a while, but I like what you do for the industry, the way you started out with these very like simple kind of like explainer videos about different subjects. And I know that's helped you make some other connections. But yeah, I think this aspect of taking time out to, I guess, invest in each other can open up doors. And then it's like, I think I've opened up my network to you. You've done the same to me. And it's not for financial benefit. It's just, it's a career enabler. And it's empowering to do that together. So from my point of view, I just want to say, like, thanks for doing what you do, taking off your bank holiday to have a chat to me. Fortunately, it's a bank holiday as well. It's Memorial Day weekend in the US, so they're actually off today as well.
No, thank you, Sue, for coming onto the podcast. My videos have helped a lot of candidates to understand the industry better, and also help recruiters like yourself to help understand what the different rules and regulations are. And I do appreciate it that you do find it valuable.
Cool. Well, yeah. Look, cheers for your time. Hope you get to enjoy some of the sunshine.
Thank you, Simon. Will do. Thank you for coming on, Simon.
Cheers, Karandeep.
Thank you for listening to the third episode of the MedTech podcast. If you have not already done so, please subscribe. If you are interested in learning more about Simon, you can connect with him on LinkedIn or visit his website at medtechfutures.com. If you have any topics you'd like for me to cover in future or any particular guest you want me to bring onto the podcast, then please feel free to also get in touch with me.